show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Book of Ruth? You've read it, kind of know something about it? Okay. How many of you, it's new to you, you're not really all that familiar? Okay. We're going to do a 4-week series beginning today out of the Book of Ruth. It's called Hope Alive. And the essence of the series is about how you find hope when God seems really far away. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the book. We're going to look at our lives and listen to them and ask God to meet us in that place. As we're getting started, I think maybe my clicker is not working. So Sharon, Sharon?
I'm working on it. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so my light is working here. So there's 4 quadrants on this image that you have before you. At the top, and in this quadrant, are those who are blessed and who feel close to God. Right? Living is easy, cotton is high, daddy is rich, mama is good looking. All things are well. Right? And sometimes we find ourselves here. We're blessed, and we know we're blessed, and God seems near. But then there are other times where we're blessed, but we're not really paying all that much attention to God's presence in our lives. God may be near or far, but it's not really much to us. We are blessed, things are going well, but it's not that God seems all that close to us. And that's a quadrant that some of us will occupy. Then we come down here, where we're not feeling all that blessed. Things are not going well. Things are not as we would want them to be, and yet, God still seems close to us. We're in a bad space, but God is near. And then there's this quadrant. Many will refer to this as kind of the dark night of the soul. This is where we are suffering. We are experiencing hardship and tragedy and difficulty, and God couldn't seem further away. This, by the way, is the quadrant that we're going to focus on over the next 4 weeks, this one right here. Because suffering and pain is very real in the world we live in. And if you don't occupy that quadrant currently, you will. That doesn't take a prophet to predict. It just takes living long enough to understand that all of us hit this space where our life just hurts and God just doesn't seem near. And why I want to speak to that is because it's a very real place that all of us will journey through. And I think as we look at and listen to the Book of Ruth and God speaking to us through it, what I want us to really get at is how do we keep hope alive when we find ourselves in quadrant number 4? How do we keep hope alive when God seems far and our life is falling apart? That's what I'm going to speak to. So if you have a Bible and you want, turn with me to the Book of Ruth. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's the 8th book in the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. I give you that instruction because Ruth only has 4 chapters and it's not easy to find if you don't know what you're looking for. Just by way of a little history, Moses and Joshua are gone. They're off the scene. The great kings of Israel have not arisen. We're in the period of the Judges. And this is a period that is marked by great disobedience in the children of Israel, great warfare and violence, and as we'll find out today, famine. It is not a good time in the life of the children of Israel. Many of them are living in quadrant 4. And as we turn to this space, we're going to be introduced to a family who is getting ready to experience just what I've been sharing with you about the pain of living in a place where God seems far. And so that's where we start. We're going to look at Ruth chapter 1. Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and his 2 sons with him. This man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Now, along the way in chapter 1, I'm going to stop, and we're just going to kind of take stock of what's going on so that you can understand their journey. And as you understand their journey, I'm just going to invite you to open to God in the best way you know how, so that you can be a part of the story. You can enter the story and live with them. Now, in that day, you know, parents, when they are naming their children nowadays, are usually looking for like what sounds cool, or perhaps it's because they're naming somebody after somebody in the family that they appreciate or are paying respect to. But in that day, the Hebrew people, when they named their children, they named them for a very specific reason and a very specific purpose. And I just want to introduce you to some of the names as we're getting started. Now, Elimelech, his name meant, "My God is King." So his name would come from the parents or the family of someone who had an allegiance or a relationship with God, and who God's place in their life was very important. If you look at Naomi, her name means sweet or pleasant. That's a really cool thing to name your daughter, right? Sweet one or pleasant one. So my God is King is married to sweet one or pleasant one. But it's weird. They have these 2 kids, Mahlon and Chilion, who they name Sick and Dying. That's not exactly like on the top 10 list of baby names right today. Mahlon and Chilion, Sick and Dying. Now, why would they name their kids Sick and Dying? That seems pretty cool. They would name their kids Sick and Dying because there was a massive famine in the land. And because they were moving into this place where they despaired of life, and they did not think, probably, that their kids would make it. They were not healthy. They were not well. They were born into this place where they felt very far from the hand of God in their life. Now, just by the way, the town that they're living in, Bethlehem, which we're familiar with for other reasons, means what? Does anybody know? House of bread. They're living in house of bread, but there's no bread to be found. So my God is King, married to the sweet one, has Sick and Dying in the house of bread where there is no bread. These are going to make sense as the story continues. I just want you to be in touch, though, with the characters in the story. So, here they are here, and they are going to go here. Okay? This is no small journey. Perhaps it's 40 to 60 miles. But they got in the car, right? So they're either on foot or maybe there's a donkey if they're lucky, but they're traveling in a barren wasteland on foot. And they're leaving House of Bread to go to this place in Moab, whose chief deity is Chemosh. All of the people who live in Moab, or the majority of the people who live in Moab, they worship this God. And he is called Destroyer, Subduer, or get this, Fish God. Now that seems odd to me. The Destroyer, the Subduer, or the Trout, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense until you get into understanding a little bit more, and we don't have so much time. But I just need you to know that their journey is a hard journey around the Dead Sea into the town of Moab. Now, why do they go to Moab? The only reason that they would go to a God-forsaken place like Moab is because there's the thought that there could be food to feed this guy's family. He doesn't want to go there, but he feels forced to go there. He's trying to stay alive. He's trying to keep his family alive. And they go to a place where God even seems more distant. And so as they make their way there, you just need to know that they've hit hard times, but the times are about to get worse. Verse 3. There seems to be no fanfare in verse 3. It just says, Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah. Her name means the back of the neck. Again, not really a sexy name if you're looking for a child's name. And the other woman's name, Ruth, which means friend. It's a little bit better. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion, both sickness and dying, actually died. And this left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband. Elimelech takes his family to Moab. And basically, as soon as they get there, he dies. And this is terrible news. Because a woman in that day needed her husband for protection, for provision. Naomi was now in a distant country with no resources, save for 2 sons, sick and dying. So her husband dies. Eventually, they married 2 Moabite women, 2 women who were from that country. And after a period of 10 years, they died. So now Naomi is in this far country. She left with her husband and her 2 sons, and now she has nothing. She is wasted. She is lost. How many of you guys have ever seen that show? And this will date you. This will tell you a little bit about you. How many of you have ever seen the show Hee Haw? Hee Haw? If you're under 40, you definitely haven't. And if you got it, James? You know Hee Haw? There's a song that they used to sing on Hee Haw. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. You know the song? Gloom, despair, and agony on me. If you know it, sing along. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it won't for bad luck, I'd have it all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Good job. So grandparents used to watch Hee Haw all the time, so I would go over and they had funny skits and stuff, but that was one of the songs. This is the song that Naomi would be singing. Nothing's going right for her. You ever been in that spot? I mean, maybe not so extreme, because she's lost everything. She's gone to a foreign place, lost her husband and her 2 sons, and God seems incredibly far. This is terrible. But this is where she is. She's in quadrant 4. And she's looking for hope, but there's no hope to be found here. The story continues. Then Naomi heard that in Moab the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughter-in-laws, she set out from the place where she'd been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. So finally, there's good news. Perhaps 10 years, maybe a little bit more time has passed, and she hears that, and guess what? Back in her hometown, there's food again. The famine is over. So she says to herself, I can't stay in this God-forsaken land not 1 second longer. And so she gets on the road and she heads home. And at the beginning of the journey, both of the daughters-in-law are with her, Orpah and Ruth, because over time they've grown to love her. But listen to what happens as they journey together. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. And then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. No, they said, we want to go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I'm too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. So they want to go back. Their husbands are dead, but they have love and allegiance to Naomi. And they're willing to leave their family and their homeland to join her. She's been faithful to them. Now they want to return the favor and be faithful to her. She does everything she can to talk them out of it. She's like, there's nothing there for you in Bethlehem. I'm way too old to think about getting married and having other kids. And even if I did, by the time they were old enough, you'd be too old for them. There is nothing for you. Please, just stay. Stay and enjoy your life. Remarry, have kids. Have a better life than the one I've had. God seems to hate me. His anger is upon me. Just leave while you can. And so, we understand a little bit more why Orpah means back of the neck, because that's what she sees. As she journeys to Bethlehem, Orpah decides to listen. And it's really not bad advice. Orpah decides to leave her and to go back, but Ruth will not. Ruth, in probably one of the more famous statements in the Old Testament, maybe in all of the Scriptures, says the following. Ruth replies to Naomi, don't ask me to leave you and to turn back. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey, and when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi, the women asked? They're looking as she makes her way. They're like, she's been gone a long time. It's been, what, 10 years, 11 years? And then they see her and they're like, oh my God, it looks like 20, 30, 40. She looks terrible. Right? And why wouldn't she? She's lost everything. So apparently her family and herself were well known. Because if the whole town, as she's coming back, looks and is greeting her and welcoming her back, they're excited to see her, but they notice that like something's changed and she looks bad. And prior to this, you have one of the most incredible acts of faithfulness that you'll ever find in all of the Scriptures. Let me just ask you, as you've heard the story, even if it's the first time, what in this story seems to be in it for Ruth? What's in it for her? Nothing, really. She's leaving everything to be with this bitter old mother-in-law who God seems to hate. And she's going, for her, to a foreign and distant land where the only promise that she makes is that your God will be my God. I'm going to change my allegiances. Chemosh is not my God anymore. Yahweh is my God. Jehovah is my God. I will worship and I will praise your God. I will do that for you. And I will die with you. Don't ask me to go anyplace else. I'm not leaving you. No matter how bad it gets, it can get worse than this, Naomi. I'm not leaving. I am with you all the way. Dear God, how many of us would love to have somebody when we find ourselves in quadrant 4, like Ruth is to Naomi? Most of the time when we're in quadrant 4, those people are very few and far between and hard to find. They can't stand to hear the honesty of the pain that's going on in our lives. They try to give us quick fixes or antidotes. They try to help us to buck up or to see things better than what they really are. What they really are is terrible right now. And Ruth's okay in that space with her. She's all right to hear what Naomi is about to say. So everybody welcomes her back. They're happy to see her. She looks a little worn and torn and ragged and aged, but in verse 20, Naomi says, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Instead, call me Mara." Mara means bitter. "For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" That's hard to hear, isn't it? Naomi's not an atheist. She believes in God when times are good, and she believes in God when times are bad. She doesn't get it. She doesn't understand why this is happening, but she feels it. She said, "I used to live in quadrant 1. I used to be blessed. And I used to feel very close to God. But over these last 10, 11, 12 years, I have been on such a journey, and I don't get it. But the Lord has raised his fist against me, his hand against me. I left full, and I am back empty. And I'm glad to be home, but don't call me sweet anymore. I am anything other than sweet. I am bitter, and I am disillusioned, and I am hurt." Thank God for people like Ruth, who can walk with her when she's in such a place. I want you just to hear a few of the Psalms, unless you think that this is somehow an exception to what people of faith express when they hit hard spots. "Oh Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide when I'm in trouble?" If you were to read Psalm 10, that's where they start. That is the beginning of the song they're singing. It doesn't end that way. Like most songs, there's a progression where eventually there's some transformation that happens, there's some changing, some turning, but that's where the song starts. And if you're in a space like Naomi is, you need to be willing and able to sing the song fully for what it is. Until God, that same God you believe in, helps to change that song for you. Because God will give you a new song.
Amen.
But you just have to stay on the road. See, Naomi came back home. She came back home to House of Bread. She came back home to her God. She's just in a hard place right now. And she's speaking the only truth she knows. Psalm 13, "Oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand?" You been in this spot? You felt this? She feels this. Psalm 22, Jesus prayed this from the cross, right? From the cross of his own death. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. What if Naomi is just giving voice to the same voice that we have, but often try to suppress when we hit this spot in our lives? What if she's just saying what most of the rest of us are feeling if we find ourselves in quadrant 4? I think the beginning of being able to move from quadrant 4 to a new place is the courage and the willingness to, in that space, open to God and be honest about where you are. Because that's where God meets us, where we are. And how can God meet us in our anger and in our distress and in our bitterness and in our disillusionment if we pretend that it doesn't even exist? We try to make excuses for it or busy ourselves so that we don't have to deal with it. This is just flesh and blood spirituality. This is just real to the heart and being honest with yourself and with God about the place that you find yourself. And the beginning of liberation is in that space opening to God, not turning away. Because many of us will act like practical atheists in this spot, but rub a little religious veneer over the top and pretend it's something other than what it is. When really what this space cries out for is just a little bit of honesty. Truth needs to meet the truth. And that's when God has access to you, the real you. We need not be afraid of hitting this space. It is a hard space. It's a space that nobody wants to go to. But I can tell you, the sooner you're honest about yourself and with God about this space, the less time you will log in that space. You will delay your journey in quadrant 4 as long as you continue to pretend that it isn't what it is. Naomi's done pretending. She's lost everything. And she's just bitter. And she's disillusioned. And she thinks God's done it to her. Now, when people that you know hit that space and they talk like that, that's very hard to deal with. There's something inside of every person who wants to be faithful to protect the image of God. To help that person say, no, it's not really God, it's the enemy, or it's your flesh, or it's whatever, fill in the blank. And it may well in fact be any of those other things, but the truth of the matter is, God sees it all unfold. And sometimes God will choose to do nothing in that space about it. And you and I, in that space, be it because of something that's going on in our life or with the life of somebody else that we love dearly, need to find the courage enough just to be honest about that space. It is the beginning of liberation for you and I. If you want to stay there longer, just pretend that it isn't what it really is. A terrible, terrible, God-forsaken place. But when you invite God into that space, even when God seems far away, because it's just what it seems like to us, it doesn't make it true. God's been with Naomi the whole time. God's been with her family, even though terrible tragedy has befallen it. It's not as if God has turned God's back on Naomi. These are just part of the things that happen when you live in a land of famine and violence and disobedience. These things happen in life. But she's finding herself trying to come to terms with what it means. When she comes back to Bethlehem, she's still on a road towards God. She's just angry. She's just hurt. The best place when we hit quadrant 4, the best thing that we can do is to stop where we are, be honest about the situation, and open that to God. Because God is the only one who can meet us in the deepest place of that pain and suffering. Because most of the time, we don't have roots. We don't even know how to be root to one another. But I hope by the end of this series, we'll learn a few things. Because God knows we all can use a root in our life. I love the first chapter because just as it's ending, the author writes a sentence, and if you blink, you miss it. but it's so important for setting up the rest of the story. Verse 22. It says, "So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring, at the beginning of the barley harvest." You know what that last sentence means? You're not going to live in quadrant 4 forever. There was a time and a season where your pain and suffering was very real and God seemed far, but God is about to seem very close as He begins to bless you beyond your ability to comprehend. What the author is saying to Naomi is, don't give up just yet. Whatever shard of hope that you can find to cling on to weather the storm, hold on, Naomi. Because things are about to change. I have seen your suffering, and I'm about to speak to it. Just hang on. Open to me, open to Ruth. I gave her to you. An unlikely person in an unlikely place at an unlikely time. When everything else seemed lost, Ruth didn't leave your side. She's from me to you. And I'm about to bless you with a harvest that is so bountiful that you couldn't possibly imagine, because you thought I was angry with you. You thought I hated you. You thought I was finished with you. It's not true. But you had to walk through that space in order to see what is true. So you just hold on a little bit, Naomi, because help's on the way. And your story is not going to be finished here. It's got another chapter. In fact, it has 3 more chapters.
Praise God.
I love how the author finishes chapter 1. Gloom, despair, and agony on me, deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it wasn't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. And yet, there's a light. There's a reason for hope. Move just a step towards it today, Naomi. Just take a step in the direction towards the harvest. Take a step in the direction towards the bounty I have for you. Be angry with me. It's okay. Feel the weight of your despair. Pretending that it isn't going to change anything. It's only going to delay your time in quadrant 4. Because truth meets truth. And when that happens, transformation happens. But as long as I resist and pretend and deny, how can God meet me in that space? God meets me where I am, not where I'm not. And so what I want to say to you guys, I hope that many of you today aren't living in quadrant 4 right now. But I have, unfortunately, this feeling that if you're not, you will be at some point. And so what you're going to learn from Ruth over the next 4 weeks is going to be something that is going to be very important to help you navigate that space, because it's a hard space. It's where faith comes and goes to die. Many people don't navigate quadrant 4 very well. Some people actually lose their faith. Some people lose their life. It's a hard, hard space. But the author says, it will not last forever. If you can take a step in the direction towards the God who's been with you the entire time, and open yourself to Him in the most honest way that you can, and open yourself to the company of others who God has given you to join you on this journey. And that's what I want to say to you guys who are in quadrant 4 right now. The harvest is coming. The bounty will be beyond your imagination or ability to comprehend. But stay faithful to your journey as you make your way back towards the house of bread. Don't wander into far countries, Moab, where the promise of something else seems better than the promise that you have, that's been given to you by God. Moab is not the time. It's not the time to go to Moab. It's not the place to go for you. Come on back to the house of bread and the God you have to believe in, that you're sometimes angry with, and that you wonder whether or not is paying attention to your life at all. Stay on the journey, because there's hope on the horizon. And hold on to whatever shard of hope that you can as you make your way back. And as you think about that, let's pray. I know, Lord, there is suffering in this room. It's the suffering of sick bodies. The suffering of sick minds. The suffering of broken relationships and failed promises. The suffering of dreams that have been dashed. The suffering of rebellious children, the suffering of broken marriages, the suffering of finances that can't make the ends meet, suffering. And so in this space, God, by your grace, help us with every real emotion we have to turn to you. To own that space, and to ask you to meet us. That's the space we find ourselves. God, would you guide us and lead us to take a step in the direction towards the harvest, towards the bounty, towards the blessings. Let us not travel a different way. Let us stay faithful to your way, even when we can't see you. And God, would you encourage those of us who maybe have been there but are not yet there now to be more like Ruth, willing to travel alongside without fixing, without needing to slap religious veneer upon our advice to those who are hurting, but just to walk with and to pledge our loyalty and support and love no matter what. Would you encourage those of us who have